Welcome to the latest episode of a show we are calling On the Line, where we talk about college football stuff and sometimes we even argue. Let's get right to it. And I tell you what, guys, I want to know if any of you are different from me on this. I owe Coach O a huge apology. Ed Orgeron, I had him fired by like Halloween. I absolutely didn't see this coming. We have Glenn Guilbeau here, who is going to shed his expertise on LSU football. Glenn, where did we all go wrong, and where is this going for LSU?
Well, I don't think Coach Orgeron was on that much of a hot seat. He did beat number 8 Miami in the first game. I think he could have survived even a 6-win season this year and still come back, because they just made a firing a couple of years ago. But he looks in great shape now. He's 3-0. He's ranked number 6. I think that was the biggest win of his career over Auburn, because it came with no other losses. His other big wins have come after big losses, and this is the highest he's been ranked after a win, and it's kind of opened up the whole season for him.
Any of you guys, seriously, did any of you think that LSU was going to be talked about as a playoff contender this year?
Well,
No.
right now, I don't know that it matters that much. Glenn said it. They've got a tough schedule coming ahead. Georgia, Mississippi State, and Alabama, I think, in 3 straight weeks. So I think we can celebrate Coach O now, but you can kind of pause the parade for, another month or so, because this could be easily a team that has a 3-game losing streak later in the year. And, they can be a top 10 team and a contender now, but if you play in the SEC West, that's short-lived. I know LSU fans are celebrating him now, and I understand that, but let's wait till October, November, and we'll see if their tune changes a little bit with Coach O.
I think what's interesting about Ed Orgeron is, I agree with what Adam says, that there's going to be more difficulty than just a road win at Auburn to come. But this feels like an opportunity to maybe either make a good first impression on some folks, or maybe change some people's minds in a way that can be a little bit more hardened and lasting, so that when there are seasons, because in the SEC West, if you're not Alabama, you're not going to be good every year. It just seems to be that's the way it works right now. This is maybe a chance to build up a little bit of goodwill, a little bit of trust within his fan base, and a little bit of people saying, don't worry, Ed Orgeron knows how to make it work out.
Mike Wilson.
Yeah, I think going off what Adam said, talking about there's a lot of games left. But on the other hand, I would say this season could already be in the dumps for LSU had they lost to Miami, had they lost to Auburn. It's not. And I think when I look at what they're doing right now, what interests me is they're finding a way to win, which is what those teams that have big seasons do. That pass that Joe Burrow threw over the middle, it barely made it through for a long touchdown. The pass interference flag coming at the right time to keep a drive alive. Those are things that you kind of have to have happen to have a great season. And so far, LSU's had those things go their way. So that's the interesting part to me, is how long can they keep winning these games that might not be pretty, but right now they're doing enough to win those games that matter.
My apology stands. I'm sorry, Coach O. All right, let's go to Vanderbilt football. Vanderbilt, Notre Dame, squandered opportunities. A really impressive showing for Vanderbilt, if you want to look at it that way. Or another highly overrated Notre Dame team, if you want to look at it that way. But 22-17, Vanderbilt has the fumble, on the doorstep of scoring, drops another TD pass, a pick in the end zone. All that, they're right there. What does that tell us about those two teams? But also, guys, there's been a lot of debate lately about rankings, which, frankly, I don't get, because it's just for fun and it's for conversation, and that's good for this sport. But people get angry every year about, why do we have these rankings so early? So let's start with you, Adam, Mr. Vanderbilt.
Well, I'll just say, from watching that game live, covering that game live, it was a missed opportunity for Vanderbilt. It's a chance where they could have put away or put a game far better in their hands early on. Now, the fumble you're talking about, the goal line, was Donovan Tennyson. The fumbled at the 1. I feel bad for him, because that was an effort play against a top 10 team where they could have cut that lead down. But actually, on the ensuing drive, just a few minutes later, he had another catch where he dropped it at the goal line. The MO on Donovan Tennyson, that receiver that made both mistakes, is at preseason camp. He's one of the fastest guys. He could get open easily, but he would drop short to intermediate passes, and he didn't secure the ball. And I saw every bit of that in those two plays. And Vandy has to have a guy to step up beyond Kalijah Lipscomb and Jared Pinkney if they're going to win games like that. But it sucks for him that it happened in a play where he was showing some effort at the goal line.
Zach, I don't know if we lost you for a minute there. Zach's trying to raise a baby and brew beer and do this show. I want to hear from you on this right now.
Not necessarily in that order.
I watched the last probably quarter of that Vanderbilt that Vanderbilt Notre Dame game, and the thing that always strikes me with teams like Vanderbilt is just that you're not going to start winning games like that until you start figuring out how to be the team that it's not making the little mistakes, that's not doing the little things that add up to big things. That as much as fans think upsets, they remember the memorable plays and upsets, the touchdown pass on a Hail Mary, the fourth down conversion, the interception return for a touchdown, whatever it is. The reality is teams like Vanderbilt, Kansas, the one I cover, Indiana, they don't start winning those games until they stop being the team that makes more mistakes, the more glaring mistakes, the more familiar mistakes. And admittedly, I did drop out of the call, so I didn't hear everything Adam said, but it feels like you can almost see, I've seen so many of those football games covering Indiana where it's close, there's hope, there's a chance, there's an opening, but then when you kind of look back, knowing how the game turned out, and you maybe watch it back a second time, you actually look back and say, was this ever really as close as we thought it was kind of in the moment? There was one side that was just constantly kind of setting itself behind the eight ball, and that's just, I think, something that smaller programs struggle to figure out how to do consistently.
Mike, I feel like you have a strong take on AP rankings.
I have no take on AP rankings, but I am intrigued by what Vanderbilt does next. When you squander an opportunity like that and you had that opportunity to kind of gain a marquee win you haven't seen in a while, what do you do now? Is it a program that has the leadership, the ability to kind of right the ship from here? Is this loss going to mess with the rest of their season? I'm genuinely intrigued by that. I think it's a good team. I've seen Kyle Shermer, what he can do specifically to Tennessee. So I'm curious what this team's able to do from here. And if they can keep kind of the momentum of what they were almost able to do going and clean up some of those little mistakes, as Zach said, then this season could be okay for Vanderbilt. But that's what I'm looking forward to watching.
If Kyle Shermer could play Tennessee every week, he'd be the number 1 overall pick next spring. Glenn, what do you think?
Yeah.
That reminded me of a Woody Woodenhofer Vanderbilt team in the 90s. Played Notre Dame really close and kind of blew it at the end, but that wasn't nearly as good a Vanderbilt team as this is. I believe you lose a touchdown potential on a crazy touchback rule, and they had some other opportunities they blew. I think Vanderbilt just needs to remember how close they came to beating a very good team, and they've looked good in their other games. So I think Vanderbilt looks like they could have a good season.
All right, last topic, guys. I'm going to invoke my former coworker, my friend, the late Drew Sharp, rest in peace. We would be in press boxes, and we would be covering a Big Ten team losing a terrible game, or there'd be one on the TV, and Drew would.
Oh, the Big Ten sucks.
There you go, Mike Wilson. Drew would bust into song, which was just as Mike was doing. He was, "Oh, the Big Ten sucks. The Big Ten sucks." That's basically his whole song. But it became a thing where the whole press box would join along with him. I think this is a great time to sing that song. I'm going to start with you, Zach. I guess you're in the position of trying to defend the Big Ten right now.
Hey, I cover a team that's tied for first place in the Big Ten at the moment. It's not the season that I think anybody expected. It's not the season I expected. I'll put my hand up and say I thought Michigan State, coming out of last season, looking what they did in the end of last season, bowl season, everything they were bringing back, I thought Michigan State was the best team in the conference. The one thing that does strike me about the Big Ten, there's maybe a little bit of panic. I mean, there's still 5 teams in the AP top 25. There's still 2 teams in the top 10. You still feel like Penn State and Ohio State might be able to round into legitimate playoff contenders come November. I do think that this is maybe as glaring of an example as we've seen since the Big Ten realigned to East and West divisions of the problem that the East-West imbalance creates, not just for an Indiana or a Maryland or a Rutgers that has to face Michigan, Michigan State, Ohio State, and Penn State every single season, but frankly for the Big Ten's hopes in the playoff. Because if you have a situation where basically all your eggs are in the Wisconsin basket for the West to give you a good team, a potential playoff team, and some people did see Wisconsin that way going into the season. Obviously, now they lose at home to BYU. You have some serious doubts. But there's really nothing. The best you can hope for is maybe you get one of those random Kirk Ferentz once in every 5 years seasons where he wins 11 games. That's a lot to hope for. And so now basically what you're going to wait for is that Big Four to just beat up on itself in the East again and again and again. Figure out basically who's the best of the best of that group, send them to Indianapolis, probably see them win the conference title game, and hope that they haven't taken either one bad loss or two losses that's going to preclude them from the playoff.
Anyone else jump on in? Mike Wilson?
You know, I think we got to look at what Ohio State's done amid the turmoil they've gone through. They're still cruising along, had a little rough patch with TCU, but did just fine in the end. But we didn't talk about Michigan much there. And Michigan had that opening loss to Notre Dame, but they've looked pretty good the last 2 weeks. Shea Patterson looks like he might be figuring it out. And if he does, that Michigan team with that defense could be as dangerous as any in the Big Ten. But certainly Michigan State's not looking like the team they're supposed to be. Penn State doesn't really look like the team we expected them to be. Nebraska, horrendous start under Scott Frost. Wisconsin losing at home, and they were expected to be a top 5, top 10 team. But that Ohio State-Michigan dynamic still is in play, and what those two teams do moving forward could be really good if they keep heading in the right direction.
I think the problem is just what happens if Michigan loses one more and then beats Ohio State.
Which they could, because Michigan goes to Michigan State and Ohio State this year, if I'm not mistaken.
It's the Kim Delaney nightmare scenario.
Right, and that is what I would argue. You know, if I'm arguing for Big Ten realignment from the perspective of any of the small teams in the East, this is an impossible task you're handing us. If I'm arguing for Big Ten realignment in the Big Ten office, though, we've got to find a way to get one of those Big Four over into the other division, because we're basically in a situation where we have to pray that one of those four is just elite over here and won't be like Ohio State last year and get beat up enough to take 2 losses before the playoff, or that there's just one team over here that's so undeniably good in the West, which there really hasn't been in the college football playoff era yet anyway. There's one team so obviously and undeniably good here in the West that they can't be turned down. I think it creates a real balance problem for the Big Ten that probably winds up working against them in the postseason.
Let's hear from our longtime SEC guys. Yeah, what about these whining Northerners here?
Hey, hold on just 1 second. You don't get to call me that. You, sir, are the Northerner in this conversation. I grew up south of the Mason-Dixon line.
I grew up south in the other hemisphere, for goodness sake. Come on.
It was a great weekend for the Big Ten if you're looking at future scheduling, because all the SEC teams are going to want to schedule the Big Ten teams now, non-conference. It's going from the Big Ten to the Big Rent-A-Win. I mean, that's just all those losses were to non-ranked teams. So that's probably the most embarrassing weekend in Big Ten history, I got to say.
It's the storyline is on the completely wrong side. I'm going to be the contrarian here and point out the obvious. These were teams that beat bad teams mostly. But they were really bad teams. The sky is falling because Maryland and Nebraska and Illinois and Northwestern lost. I know Wisconsin, that was an upset, but
Kansas beat Rutgers, man.
Those are not really good teams, and I think you need to pay attention to the other side. I covered the Sun Belt and Conference USA for a decade, and it irked me to no end when I would see one of those schools listed as an FCS, a 1AA, and I blame ignorant fans and I blame lazy sports writers for that, of thinking that college football only includes about 30 teams and about 3 conferences. When I covered the Sun Belt, Troy did this every other year. They beat Nebraska this year, but they beat Mississippi State. They beat a ranked Missouri team. They beat Oklahoma State one year. They beat LSU last year. Should have beat them a few years before that. I saw Maryland lose two times in a row to Middle Tennessee. BYU is a really good program. Southern Florida was a top 5 team. I know that was a decade ago, but it's a good program. The fact that the sky is falling because some bad Big Ten teams played